Hello everyone, my name is Natalie and welcome to my channel. Sunday marked the end of the 2019 reading rush. It was my very first year participating and y'all, I won. I didn't complete my personal goal of reading 7 books, but over the course of the readathon, I read 1,737 pages, my daily average being around 250. I read 6 books, completed all 7 of the reading challenges, and earned 3 extra badges for participating in a Bookstagram challenge, reading a 5-star book, and reading over 1,000 pages. The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by Kate DiCamillo was my book featuring a non-human character. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this book. It spans many years and Edward encounters a lot of different people from various backgrounds and walks of life. The relationship he has with the humans he meets are very touching, and there are some chapters where I was on the verge of tears. The ending is cheesy and predictable, but it still made me emotional and I still like it. Edward's character development from being prideful and selfish to being more compassionate and empathetic was good, but I think it could have been rounded out a bit more. It takes place over many years, but I felt like I wanted more of Edward's thoughts, and being in his mindset would have made that transition in his character a bit smoother. However, I did like that his journey was marked by heartbreak and even loss, and it explored the idea that love isn't always easy and sometimes it even hurts. This was surprising for me for a children's book. It's probably about a 4th grade level, but I do think that his struggle with understanding the nature of love and that it's not always what you expect adds some depth to his arc. When I read this book, I read along to an audiobook I found on Scribd. It was narrated by Judith Ivey, and I really didn't like the audiobook. I actually ended up stopping it probably halfway through the book, and I'm surprised I got that far. It wasn't a bad audiobook necessarily, I just didn't like the voices she used for a lot of the characters, especially the children. It just took away from the experience for me, and I just decided to stop listening to it so there wasn't a risk of the audiobook ruining the real book for me. The next book I read was The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. I originally gave it 4 stars, but I'm considering bumping it down to 3.5 or 3 because the more I think about it, it was a well-written book, but how much did I really enjoy it? It's a magical realism book about a man who comes home for a funeral, hasn't visited in years, and he ends up looking back on a disturbing event that happened when he was a young boy and just trying to make sense of what actually happened. The part that was weird for me and that kind of made it hard for me to get into the book was it's from this grown man's perspective, right? He's remembering and we're experiencing these memories alongside him. That's how it initially appears. But the flashback chapters that take up the majority of the book are written in a childish way. Like, he's not just remembering these events, he's remembering them as how a child would. He's remembering them how a child would think of these things. It's like he's going back in time and re-experiencing them as a child, not looking back on them as a grown man. I don't know if that actually made any sense. Hopefully you know what I meant, but magical realism sometimes is hard to explain. It seemed appropriate to me, considering it's set in the UK, to take the magical and mysterious ancient history and bring it into the present day. And although the way it was told made the story a bit hard for me to get into at first, I did like the ideas that it presented. Next, I read P.S. I Still Love You by Jenny Han, the sequel to All the Boys I've Loved Before. This book got 3 out of 5 stars. I did like it to a certain degree, and I still want to read the 3rd book in the series, but I definitely had my issues with it. I was expecting more from it considering how much I loved the first book. I liked that Lara Jean is now having to navigate unfamiliar territory, and that the fake relationship that she had with Peter has now turned into a real relationship with real feelings and real conflicts. I think it started out as a really great way for Lara Jean's character to continue developing. There is a love triangle in this book. John Ambrose McLaren, another boy who received a love letter from Lara Jean, is reintroduced into this story. It's probably about halfway through the book when he appears in the plotline as a major character. I'm not a big fan of love triangles, and I think that although the book indicates that there is a passage of time, it's not insta-love or anything. Lara Jean and John's relationship and feelings for each other develop too quickly for it to be completely realistic. What really killed this book for me was Lara Jean's attitude towards Peter's ex-girlfriend, Genevieve. There's a lot of girl hate in this book that's unnecessary, and it leads to a lot of unnecessary conflicts that could have easily been avoided. Lara Jean is constantly jealous of Jen. She does admit this is a problem multiple times, and it's something that she has to resolve in order for her relationship with Peter to heal and progress. Unfortunately, it's a constant thought throughout the story. She is jealous of how intimate Peter and Jen were when they were dating. She is jealous of the fact that Peter is spending a lot of time with Jen and not necessarily getting her permission to do it. And it creates conflict when Peter refuses to tell her why he's spending time with her. Once he does reveal why, it makes sense to me that he would keep it, because it's a very personal thing. It's not necessarily his secret to tell. She just insists on making Jen into this monster in her mind. She doesn't really think that there could be a good reason behind why Peter and Jen are still hanging out together. She doesn't attempt to humanize her until the very end. She just thinks that Jen is manipulative and trying to steal Peter back. There's also a game Lara Jean and the old friend group from middle school end up playing the last third or so of the book, which further fuels Lara Jean and Jen's conflict. I have to agree with Peter on this. The game is really stupid, and I really don't like what it turned into. On top of that, the book ended way too quickly and neatly once the game ended. The next book I've read was The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Society by Marianne Schaefer. This was the first, and I'm now realizing only 5-star book I've read during the readathon, and it's what got me the Read a 5-star book badge. I love this book so much. I knew going into it that it was an epistolary novel. It was told through letters. What I didn't expect was that it was entirely in letter format. Some people really don't like this format from some of the reviews I've read. That's a big reason why they DNF'd it in the first place, but I personally really liked it. Loved the main character Juliet's writing style and her wittiness, and just the relationship that developed between all the characters. Guernsey was under German occupation. They were completely cut off from the rest of the world, but it also brought together a very unlikely group of people. Even though I love learning about the world wars, and I've read a lot of books that deal with it, whether fiction or nonfiction, I learned a lot about World War II in this book that I didn't know before. Something that I personally loved as a reader was there's a lot in this book about what it means to be a writer and a reader, the power of books and how reading can transform people's lives. I will say this book is a lower 5 stars in comparison to some other 5-star books for me, such as The Night Circus and Letters to the Lost. There is a romance subplot that sneaks in there towards the end. It progresses rather suddenly. You're only seeing letters, and I think that prevents the relationship from developing very well. It also switches to a journal format the last few pages, and you only get one character's perspective after that rather than Juliet's perspective or a wide cast of perspectives like you've been getting the rest of the book prior to that. I just didn't like it because it is a pretty sudden transition. However, those are decisions that the author may have not made. She was terminally ill during the last few stages of editing and rewriting, and she died before the book was published and her niece finished. The book I read for the reading rush was Clara and Mr. Tiffany by Susan Rayland. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. It was very interesting and insightful to the treatment and conditions of female workers and artists, and also immigrants, because a lot of the young women Clara hires are immigrants. I loved the scenes of Clara's creativity, her moments of inspiration, how she thought about art and nature, and her process of creating the glass windows and lamps. She struggles with her desire to be Mr. Tiffany's equal and his partner in creativity, to be a valued part of the company, and to be taken seriously as both an artist and a woman. Additionally, her relationships with the other women in the department is just so tender, and it's a big part of her character development as well. Even though this book is from Claire's perspective, it also tells the story of Louis Tiffany, his creative aspirations, and how that affects his relationships with his family, his business partners, and his workers, the legacy he has to live up to, and also his ideas of grandeur and artistic beauty versus the reality and limitations of the business and finances. My only con is the time span. This book takes place over 12 years. I understand why they didn't detail all 12 years, because that would be way too long of a book, but the passage of time didn't always translate well, and there were also some parts of the book that dragged. The last book I read was The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender by Leslie Walton. I gave this book a 2 out of 5 stars initially. That may change. It may go lower. May become the lowest rated book I've read all year. It's only taken me 7 months to get to that point. I was expecting this to be one of those books that I loved and gushed over and constantly recommend other people read. The opposite could not be more true. The more I read this book, the more my rating of it decreased. Firstly, this book is marketed incorrectly. It's very misleading. According to the synopsis, you're getting a magical realism coming-of-age story about a girl with wings named Ava Lavender, and it kind of sets you up to think that she's also going to get her own chance at love. And she's also delving into her family past, supposedly to figure out who she is. In reality, this book is a historical fantasy about 3 different women in the Lavender Rue family and what seems to be a curse of ill-fated love that perpetuates throughout the generations. The plot is very weak and has a lot of plot holes. The first third or so of the book is detailing the family history. Ava is touted to be one of the main characters, but isn't even born until about a third of the way through the book. And after she is introduced, her character just doesn't seem very fleshed out to me. I wasn't very invested in her, and she just didn't seem that involved in the story. Something that was weird for me was Ava is supposed to be narrating it. And while it is told from the perspective of Ava years after the events of the story, it still doesn't explain how she knows what the other characters were thinking, doing, or feeling when she wasn't around and when they weren't communicating with her. It would have made a lot more sense for the narrator to be third-person omniscient and removed from the rest of the story. The central plot is very weak even after Ava comes into the story. There are a lot of plot holes, especially in regards to the ending. Part of the problem stems from the world building. part of the problem stems from the world building. There are some things really critical. There's some things critical to the story and events that aren't fully explained or grounded. The women in this story encounter a lot of obstacles and suffering, but the problem I have is they are never allowed to overcome them. It's not to say that they can't. They have plenty of opportunities, but the author refuses to let them take those chances. I will give out a major spoiler for the end of this book, but only because I think it is necessary to talk about it. It's something that I didn't really see in a lot of reviews, but I think it's really important. There is a rape in this book. It is very distressing, and the implications of this authorial choice is disturbing to me. Basically, the rape acts as a catalyst for the family curse being broken and the women being able to overcome the obstacles they faced and move on in their lives. There's this idea of fate woven throughout the story. How it seems to me, these women don't really express agency over their lives. Sorrows they face are fated and they're unavoidable. And the way the author writes it, the rape was also fated and unavoidable, even though there were a ton of points in the story where it could have logically been prevented. Again, there's lots of big plot holes, and the choices the author makes to try and ensure that this rape happens are ridiculous. Additionally, the rape takes place in the last 30 pages of the book, and about 2 of them are devoted to that character's recovery from it. And everything ties up into a nice, neat bow. Everyone gets their happy ending. Not only is that just horrible writing and plotting in general, it's using sexual violence simply as a way to move the plot forward. And the way Leslie Walton handled the rape and its aftermath is just so disrespectful to people who have been sexually assaulted. Women in the book have been subjected to other instances of violence as well, and the fact that the author is calling their sorrows beautiful and labeling the characters, including the one who was raped, as love's victims, that's a direct quote, is frankly disgusting. Rape and gender-directed violence is not love. It does not stem from love. It comes from a place of wanting power and dominance and the belief that a person is simply an object to be possessed and controlled. In short, The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender is poorly written, and very little of it, aside from the cover, is actually beautiful. Now that we've gone through that little rant, if you participated in the reading rush this year, what are your favorite books that you discovered during it? And if you didn't participate, what are some of your favorite books you read during the month of July? Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and click the notification bell to stay updated. Have a wonderful rest of your day, keep reading, and I'll see you next time here on The Mighty Quill.